The sun didn't shine in Sarah's bedroom anymore. Not really. It just sort of struggled through the single sloped window of the attic room, casting long, dusty fingers across the faded quilt her grandmother had sewn 60 years ago in Georgia. At 65, Sarah's joints sang a symphony of pops and cracks every morning, a reminder of 30 years spent on her feet as a head nurse, lifting patients and spirits in equal measure. She sat on the edge of her narrow twin bed, her dark mahogany skin glowing softly in the morning light. She rubbed her knees with a rhythmic, practiced motion. Today was Tuesday. In this house, the house she had handed over $80,000 of her own equity to help buy, Tuesday meant 3 loads of laundry, a deep scrub of the kitchen, and a pot of collard greens that had to be seasoned just right before Marcus got home. Sarah stood up, smoothing her housecoat. She looked at the photo of her late husband, Elijah, on the nightstand. He was wearing his Sunday best, a silver-haired man with a smile that could light up the south side of Chicago. "I'm still here, Elijah," she whispered, still holding the line. Descending the stairs was a lesson in invisibility. As Sarah entered the kitchen, the chaos of the Miller household swirled around her like a storm she wasn't invited to. "Mama, have you seen my blue blazer? I have a showing at 10. Maya yelled from the hallway, her voice tight with the frantic energy of a realtor who hadn't closed a deal in months. "It's pressed and hanging in the laundry room, baby," Sarah said softly, already reaching for the coffee pot. "Grandma, I forgot my lunch money again." Aaliyah, 12 and growing far too fast, sighed as she stared into an empty backpack. Sarah reached into the pocket of her housecoat, pulling out a crisp $5 bill, part of the small allowance she kept from her Social Security check. "Take it, sugar. Get that apple you like." Then there was Marcus. He sat at the head of the table, the place that used to feel like it belonged to the man of the house, but now felt like a throne for a king whose crown was tarnished. He didn't look up from his phone. He was wearing a designer tracksuit that cost more than Sarah's monthly medication. His eyes were bloodshot, tracking the jagged red lines of a cryptocurrency app. "Greens tonight, Sarah?" Marcus asked, his voice devoid of a please or thank you. "And make sure the cornbread isn't dry like last time. We might have guests, important people." "I'll see what I can do, Marcus," Sarah replied, her voice a calm mask. She watched him. She noticed the way his hands shook slightly. She noticed how he avoided Maya's eyes when she asked about the mortgage payment. Sarah had been a nurse too long not to recognize the symptoms of a man drowning in his own secrets. By 11 a.m., the house was silent. Sarah moved through the rooms like a guardian spirit. She gathered Marcus's discarded socks. She wiped the sticky residue of breakfast from the granite counters, and she hummed an old Mahalia Jackson hymn. The first crack in the porcelain appeared near the trash can. Marcus had been frantic that morning, tearing through his briefcase. A crumpled envelope had missed the bin, wedged between the cabinet and the floor. Sarah leaned down, her back protesting, and picked it up. It was an official notice from a prestigious local bank. The bold red stamp across the front made her heart stutter. Notice of accelerated foreclosure. Sarah's breath hitched. Foreclosure? She knew Maya's real estate business was slow, but they lived in a $600,000 home in a gated suburb of Atlanta. They drove a Lexus. Marcus talked about venture capital and diversifying portfolios every night at dinner. She opened the letter. It wasn't just a late payment. It was 4 months of arrears. The bank was threatening to take the house Sarah's life savings were buried in. She sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hand. She thought back to the day they bought this place. Maya had cried, hugging Sarah, telling her, "You'll never have to worry again, Mama. You'll have a home for life." Now Sarah looked around the bright, open-concept kitchen. It felt cold. It felt like a stage set where the actors had stopped believing in the play. Later that afternoon, while the greens simmered on the stove, the scent of smoked turkey and vinegar filling the air, Sarah did something she never did. She went into Marcus's home office. She told herself she was just looking for a stapler to fix Aaliyah's school project. But the nurse in her needed to diagnose the wound. The office smelled of expensive cologne and stale energy drinks. On the desk sat a secondary laptop, the screen still glowing. Sarah didn't know much about the blockchain, but she knew what a downward trend looked like. The screen was a sea of red. Tens of thousands of dollars. Gone. Underneath a stack of glossy entrepreneur magazines, she found a ledger. She flipped through it. Her eyes widened. Marcus hadn't just lost his money. He had been borrowing from Maya's commissions. And then her heart stopped. There was a photocopy of Sarah's own Social Security card and her retirement account details from her nursing days. Next to it, a sticky note in Marcus's handwriting. Potential equity, $120,000 left in the old lady's 401k bridge loan. The old lady. The words hit her harder than any physical blow. To them, to him, she wasn't the woman who had spent 48 hours in labor to bring Maya into the world. She wasn't the woman who had worked double shifts for 10 years so Maya could have a private tutor. She was an asset, a bridge loan, a safety net to be cut and used for his next gamble. At 6:30 p.m., the front door heavy-thudded closed. "Dinner smells good," Maya said, walking into the kitchen. She looked exhausted, her makeup creasing under her eyes. She dropped her keys on the counter, right on top of the spot where the foreclosure letter had been only hours before. Sarah had hidden the letter. She wasn't ready to strike yet. She wanted to see if they would tell her. "Greens are ready, baby. Cornbread is in the oven," Sarah said, her voice steady, though her soul felt like it was vibrating. Marcus walked in a moment later, slapping his hands together. "There she is. Best cook in the county. Listen, Sarah, Maya, I've been thinking. With the market being a bit volatile, we might need to look at some short-term restructuring of the household finances." Maya paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "What kind of restructuring, Marcus?" Marcus leaned back, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Just some optimization. Making sure all our capital is working for us, especially the steady income, like Sarah's pension. It's sitting in a low-interest account. It's a waste, really." Sarah looked at him. She looked at the man wearing a $200 haircut, eating the food she bought with her wasteful pension money. "My pension is doing just fine where it is, Marcus," Sarah said. The table went silent. Even Aaliyah looked up from her plate. "I'm just saying," Marcus's voice dropped an octave, gaining that sharp, manipulative edge. "We're a team, and in a team, everyone puts their chips in the middle, especially when things get tight." "Are things tight, Marcus?" Sarah asked, her gaze unwavering. Marcus chuckled, but it sounded like dry leaves scraping on pavement. "Tight? No, just strategic. We'll talk more later." Maya looked between them, a flicker of fear crossing her face, but she quickly looked down at her plate. She chose the silence. She chose the lie. That night, Sarah didn't go to sleep. She sat in her rocking chair in the attic, the one piece of furniture she had kept from her old home. She realized that the cracks in the house weren't in the walls. They were in the hearts of the people she loved. She realized that for years she had been the glue, but glue only works if the pieces want to stay together. She thought about the foreclosure. She thought about Marcus's plan to raid her 401k. She reached under her bed and pulled out a small, locked metal box. She took the key from around her neck. Inside wasn't money. It was a deed. A deed to 5 acres of land in a small town 2 hours south. Land that had been in her family since 1920. Land Marcus didn't know existed because he never asked about her history. He only asked about her balance. "They think I'm the old lady in the attic," Sarah whispered to the dark room. She picked up her phone. She didn't call Maya. She called a number she hadn't dialed in years. "Pastor Jenkins? It's Sarah Miller." "Yes, Elijah's wife." "I'm fine, brother, but I think I'm going to be needing the strength of the community soon. I think I'm going to be coming home." As she hung up, a flash of lightning flickered in the distance. A storm was coming to Georgia, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah wasn't afraid of the rain. She was the one who was going to bring the thunder. The rain began as a low, rhythmic drumming on the roof, but by 7 p.m., it had turned into a full-scale Georgia deluge. Inside the Miller household, the air was thick, not with the smell of home-cooked food, but with a tension so sharp you could almost hear it hum. Sarah sat in the living room, her hands moving rhythmically with her knitting needles. She was working on a deep purple scarf for Aaliyah. Every time the front door rattled from a gust of wind, she felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. Marcus was pacing. He had been on his phone for 3 hours, his voice rising in jagged bursts from the hallway. Maya sat on the sofa opposite Sarah, staring blankly at a real estate contract she hadn't signed in days. Marcus finally entered the room. He didn't sit down. He stood over Sarah, blocking the light from the floor lamp. "The bank called again, Maya," Marcus said, his voice flat, dangerously calm. Maya flinched. "I thought you said you handled the extension, Marcus." "I tried, but they want a good faith payment by tomorrow morning. $10,000 or they start the formal process. The Lexus is already on the list for repossession. Maya put her head in her hands. 10,000? We don't have 1,000 right now. Marcus turned his gaze slowly toward Sarah. It was the look of a predator finding the weakest link in the fence. We don't, but Sarah does. That 401k we talked about? Or even just the next 3 months of her Social Security checks up front. If she signs the authorization, I can have the funds moved tonight. Sarah stopped knitting. The click-clack of the needles ceased, leaving only the sound of the rain. She looked up at Marcus. I told you, Marcus, that money is for my granddaughter's future. It's the only thing Elijah and I have left to give her. Aaliyah won't have a future if we're living in a shelter, Marcus snapped. You're living here for free, Sarah. Eating our food, using our lights. It's time to pay the tab. Sarah's heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold hand. She turned to her daughter. Maya, is this what you want? You want your mother to hand over her last bit of security for a man who gambled away your savings on the internet? Maya didn't look up. Her voice was a broken whisper. Mama, we're going to lose everything. Marcus says it's just a loan. He'll pay it back when his new venture starts. He doesn't have a venture, Maya. He has a gambling addiction. Sarah's voice finally broke its calm. I saw the laptop. I saw the debt. If I give him this money, it will be gone in a week and we'll still be losing the house. Marcus stepped closer, his face reddening. You ungrateful old woman. We took you in when you were limping and alone. We gave you this beautiful room. And now when the family is hurting, you're going to be selfish? You're going to sit on your pile of gold while your daughter suffers? It's not gold, Marcus. It's my life, Sarah said, standing up. She was shorter than him, but in that moment she seemed to tower over the room. And the answer is no, not tonight, not ever. The explosion wasn't loud, it was cold. Fine, Marcus said. If you're not part of the solution, you're a liability. And I don't keep liabilities in my house. He walked toward his hallway and grabbed the 2 suitcases Sarah kept in the guest closet, the ones she had never fully unpacked because deep down, she knew this day might come. He began throwing her things into them with a violent efficiency. Marcus, stop! Maya cried, standing up, but she didn't move toward him. She stayed rooted to the carpet, her hands over her mouth. No, Maya, she wants to be an independent woman? Let her be independent in the street, Marcus yelled. He hauled the bags to the front door and flung it open. The wind whipped rain into the pristine foyer. He looked at Sarah. You have 10 minutes to get your coat, or I'll throw you out without it. Sarah looked at her daughter. This was the moment. The climax of 30 years of motherhood. She waited for Maya to scream, to hit Marcus, to tell him to leave. But Maya just started to cry. A soft, pathetic sobbing. She looked at Sarah, then looked at the floor. I'm sorry, Mama, Maya whispered. I can't lose him. Sarah felt a strange, icy clarity settle over her. The pain was so sharp it went numb. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She walked to the hallway, took her heavy raincoat and her mother's cast-iron skillet from the kitchen counter. She walked to the door. Marcus was breathing hard, a triumphant, ugly look on his face. You'll be back in 2 days begging to sign those papers, he sneered. Sarah stopped at the threshold. She looked him dead in the eye, her voice as steady as a heartbeat. Marcus, you think you've thrown me out, but you've actually just let me out. And you're going to find out very soon that a house built on lies can't stand a storm like me. She stepped out into the pouring rain. The door slammed behind her, the lock clicking with a finality that echoed in her bones. Sarah stood on the porch for a moment, her suitcases at her feet. The rain soaked through her shoulders instantly. Across the street, the neighbors' lights were cozy and warm. They had no idea that a 65-year-old pillar of the community had just been discarded like trash. She dragged her bags to her old sedan, the one she had paid for in cash, the one Marcus hadn't managed to get his name on yet. As she started the engine, she looked up at the second-floor window. Aaliyah was standing there, her small face pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her face. Sarah blew her a kiss, shifted the car into gear, and drove away. She wasn't driving to a hotel. She wasn't driving to a shelter. She was driving toward the only thing Marcus couldn't touch, her history. The windshield wipers of Sarah's old sedan groaned in a rhythmic, tired cadence, slicing through the sheets of Georgia rain that blurred the world into shades of charcoal and indigo. 2 hours away, in a house filled with granite counters and hollow promises, her daughter and son-in-law probably thought she was huddled in a motel room, weeping into a thin pillow. They thought they had broken the matriarch. They were wrong. As the tires hit the gravel path of Mount Zion Baptist Church, the familiar scent of damp pine and red clay filled the cabin of the car. Sarah pulled up to the parsonage, the small white house where Reverend Jenkins had lived for 40 years. Before she could even cut the engine, the porch light flickered on. The Reverend, a man whose skin looked like weathered teak and whose eyes held the wisdom of 1,000 Sunday mornings, stepped out. He didn't ask why she was there at 2 a.m. with rain-soaked suitcases. He simply opened his arms. "Welcome home, Sarah," he said, his voice a deep, gravelly comfort. "Elijah always said you were the strongest branch on the tree. I reckon it was time for that branch to stop bending." Sarah didn't spend her first morning in exile sleeping in. By 5 a.m., the habits of a 30-year nursing career took over. She washed her face in the small guest bathroom behind the church hall, pinned her silver hair into a tight, dignified bun, and headed straight for the kitchen. She reached for the heavy burlap bag she had brought with her. Inside was her mother's cast-iron skillet. It was more than a pan. It was a relic. It had fried chicken during the Jim Crow era, seared steaks for Elijah when he came home from the factory, and cooked the very first meal Maya ever ate. Sarah placed it on the industrial stove of the church hall. The blue flame licked the bottom of the black iron, and Sarah felt a surge of electricity through her fingers. She began to cook. She didn't have much, just a few sacks of flour, some cornmeal, and a dozen eggs donated by a local deacon. But under Sarah's hands, those humble ingredients transformed. The smell of honey butter cornbread and slow-simmered grits began to drift through the open windows, catching the morning breeze. By noon, the small thank-you meal she intended for the Reverend had turned into a community event. Word had traveled through the town's grapevine, the invisible network of phone calls and porch whispers, that Sarah Miller was back and she was in the kitchen. "Ms. Sarah, this tastes like my grandmama's Sunday table," a young man said, closing his eyes as he bit into a biscuit. Sarah leaned against the counter, a clean apron tied over her housecoat. For the first time in years, she wasn't being told the stove was too expensive to run or that her presence was a liability. Here, she was a healer. She realized that while Marcus saw her as a bridge loan, this community saw her as a cornerstone. 3 days into her stay, Sarah drove out to the edge of the county. She stopped the car where the paved road gave way to red dirt. Standing there, framed by ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss, was the 5-acre plot of land her father had left her. Marcus and Maya lived in a $600,000 house, but they owned nothing. Every brick belonged to the bank. But here, under the humid Georgia sky, Sarah stood on land that was hers down to the bedrock. She walked to the center of the field, her boots sinking into the soft earth. She remembered her father telling her, "Sarah, people will lie to you, and the world will try to steal from you. But the dirt stays true. If you take care of the land will take care of you." She looked at her phone. She had 17 missed calls from Maya and 5 from Marcus. She didn't answer them. Instead, she dialed a different number. "Frank, it's Sarah Miller. I need a favor. Not a nursing favor, a legal one." Frank Darrow had been a young intern when Sarah was the head nurse at the county hospital. She had saved his skin more than once when he'd botched a chart or missed a symptom. Now he was one of the sharpest real estate attorneys in the state. "Sarah," Frank's voice boomed over the line. "I've been waiting for this call for 10 years. I never liked that man Maya married. He's got con artist written in his DNA. What do you need?" "I need you to pull the records on my land," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "And I need you to look into a mortgage application Marcus tried to force me to sign. I suspect he didn't take no for an answer." Back in Atlanta, the Miller household was falling apart. Without Sarah's invisible labor, the engine had seized. The laundry was piling up in sour-smelling heaps. The kitchen, once the heart of the home, was now a graveyard of takeout boxes and dirty coffee mugs. Maya sat at the dining table, her eyes red-rimmed. She had spent the morning arguing with the Lexus dealership. The car was gone, repossessed while she was in the shower. "Where is she, Marcus?" Maya whispered. "She hasn't answered a single text. Even Aaliyah won't look at me." Marcus was pacing the foyer, his designer suit wrinkled, his hair unkempt. "She's being dramatic, Maya. She's probably at some cheap motel trying to make us feel guilty. She'll come crawling back when her knees start hurting and she wants a soft bed. She didn't take her medicine, Marcus, Maya said, her voice rising. She left her blood pressure pills on the nightstand. If something happens to her... Nothing is going to happen to her, Marcus shouted, his facade finally cracking. We have bigger problems. The bank won't wait another week. I've already submitted the paperwork for the equity draw. Maya froze. What paperwork? Mama didn't sign anything. Marcus stopped pacing. He didn't look at her. I took care of it, Maya. I used the power of attorney she gave us 3 years ago when she had that fall. It's for the good of the family. Once the land sells, we'll pay her back. She won't even know it happened. Maya felt a sick, cold dread settle in her stomach. The land? What land? The 5 acres in the valley. The old lady was sitting on a gold mine and let us drown. I'm just leveling the playing field. Back at the church, Sarah sat in Frank's mobile office, a sleek black SUV parked under the oaks. Frank handed her a tablet. He did it, Sarah. He used an old expired power of attorney and forged your signature on a quitclaim deed. He's already listed the 5 acres for sale with a cash-only investor. He's desperate. He needs that money to cover the fraud he committed at Maya's real estate firm. Sarah looked at the digital signature. It was a poor imitation of her elegant, cursive script. A script she had used to sign thousands of discharge papers, to write love letters to Elijah, and to sign the birth certificate of the daughter who was now letting her husband rob her blind. He thinks I'm a ghost, Frank, Sarah said, a cold smile touching her lips. He thinks because I'm over 60 and I spend my days in a kitchen, my mind has turned to mush. What do you want to do? Frank asked. We can file for an injunction today. We can have the police at his door by dinner. Sarah watched a red-tailed hawk circle above her land. No, not yet. If we stop him now, he'll just find another way to lie. I want him to sign the final closing papers. I want him to take the earnest money. I want him to commit a felony so grand that no amount of Maya's crying can save him. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. In the meantime, I have a business to run. Reverend Jenkins says the governor's re-election committee is looking for a local caterer for the town hall meeting next week. They want authentic Georgia soul food. Sarah picked up her mother's skillet. I'm going to give them exactly what they want, and then I'm going to give Marcus exactly what he deserves. That evening, Aaliyah called. She was hiding in the pantry, her voice a tiny, frightened whisper. Grandma, are you okay? It's so loud here. Dad is screaming at the computer and Mom is just sitting in the dark. I'm more than okay, sugar, Sarah said, her heart aching at the sound of her granddaughter's fear. I'm in the best place I've been in years. I'm in a place where the sun hits the floor just right, and nobody tells me I'm a liability. Can I come see you? Soon, baby. Very soon. But I need you to do something for me. I need you to go into your dad's office when he's not there. Look for a blue folder with the bank's logo. Tell me if there's a date on the final notice. I found it, Aaliyah whispered a minute later. It says final sale date, March 24th. Sarah checked her calendar. March 24th. The same day Marcus expected the land money to hit his account. The same day she was scheduled to serve the governor. Thank you, Aaliyah. You stay strong, you hear me? You're a Miller woman. We don't break. We just get tempered in the fire. As she hung up, Sarah looked out at the rolling hills of her property. Marcus thought he was playing a game of checkers. He thought he could move her like a wooden piece on a board. He didn't realize Sarah was playing a game of life, and she had already moved her king into position. The rebirth was complete. Now, it was time for the reckoning. The morning of March 24th arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. A heavy mist clung to the Georgia pines, but inside the kitchen of Mount Zion's Fellowship Hall, the heat was stifling and the energy was electric. Sarah stood at the center of the chaos, a general in a white apron. 5 assistant cooks from the church community moved around her, boxing up hundreds of portions of her signature resurrection ribs and honey-glazed yams for the governor's town hall. But Sarah's mind was 2 hours north. Today was the day this bank was scheduled to auction Maya's house. It was also the day Marcus expected a wire transfer of $150,000 from the cash sale of Sarah's ancestral land, a sale built on a forged signature and a mountain of lies. Ms. Sarah, the governor's motorcade just pulled into the square, a young deacon called out. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron. She looked at her phone. A text from Frank Darrow appeared. The buyer's attorney is at Marcus's office now. He just signed the closing affidavit. He's committed the felony, Sarah. The trap is shut. Sarah felt a cold, sharp satisfaction. Load the vans, she commanded, but I won't be at the square. Frank is picking me up. I have a closing to attend. Marcus sat in his home office, the air smelling of sweat and expensive scotch. Across from him sat a representative from a shell company, the cash buyer Marcus had found to buy Sarah's land quickly and quietly. Everything is in order, the man said, sliding a final stack of papers across the desk. Once you sign as the power of attorney for Sarah Miller, the funds will be released to the escrow account. Marcus's hand trembled as he picked up the pen. He looked at the door. Maya was standing in the hallway, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She knew something was wrong, but she was too terrified of the truth to ask. Just sign it, Marcus, Maya whispered. Save the house, please. Marcus scribbled the name Sarah Miller. It was done. He exhaled a breath he felt he'd been holding since the night he threw Sarah out into the rain. He looked at his computer screen, waiting for the bank's portal to show the pending transfer. He imagined the look on the auctioneer's face when he paid the arrears in full. He imagined telling Sarah she could come back, but only if she stayed in the attic and kept her mouth shut. Then the front door didn't just open. It erupted. Marcus jumped to his feet as the heavy thud of footsteps echoed in the foyer. He expected the bank's bailiffs. He did not expect Sarah. She walked into the office first. She wasn't wearing the faded housecoat she'd left in. She wore a tailored suit of royal blue, her silver hair styled in a sharp, elegant bob. Behind her stood Frank Darrow, carrying a briefcase that looked like a weapon. Behind them stood two men in dark suits, detectives from the county's white-collar crime unit. Mama? Maya gasped, stepping into the room. Marcus's face turned a sickly shade of gray. Sarah? What are you doing here? This is a private business meeting. It's a crime scene, Marcus, Sarah said, her voice dropping into that low, resonant tone that used to make the hospital residents tremble. And I've always been one for a clean environment. Frank Darrow stepped forward, slamming a document onto the desk over the forged papers. Mr. Miller, I'm Frank Darrow, legal counsel for Ms. Sarah Miller. I am here to inform you that the power of attorney you just used was revoked 30 days ago. The deed you just signed is a fraudulent instrument. You can't do that, Marcus stammered, his eyes darting toward the computer. The money? The wire is pending. The wire is redirected, Frank said with a thin smile. The buyer you've been talking to? That's a holding company owned by Sarah Miller. You just tried to sell Sarah's own land back to her using a forged signature. We have the audio, the video, and the ink is still wet on your felony. Maya let out a choked sob. Marcus? You forged her name? You stole the land? I did it for us, Maya, Marcus screamed, his composure finally shattering. She was sitting on it. She wouldn't help. I was saving our home. You weren't saving a home, Marcus, Sarah said, walking toward him. She didn't stop until she was inches from his face. You were saving your ego. You threw me out in the rain like I was a piece of trash because I wouldn't let you pick my pockets. You thought because I was old, I was obsolete. You thought because I was quiet, I was stupid. She turned to her daughter. Maya was trembling, looking at Marcus with a mixture of fear and habit. Maya, listen to me, Sarah said, her voice softening but remaining firm. The bank is at the front gate. The auction is in 30 minutes. Marcus is going to leave this house in handcuffs. That is a fact. The only question is, are you going with him? Mama, I didn't know. Ignorance is not an excuse for betrayal, Maya, Sarah interrupted. You watched him throw your mother into a storm. You watched him steal. You chose to be silent so you could keep your granite counters and your designer bags. Now the counters are being sold and the bags are empty. One of the detectives stepped forward. Marcus Miller, you are under arrest for grand theft, forgery, and identity fraud. Turn around. As the handcuffs clicked, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the empty, hollow house, Marcus turned his venom on Maya. This is your fault. If you'd been a better earner, if you'd controlled your mother, we wouldn't be here. Maya looked at the man she had defended, the man she had chosen over her own flesh and blood. She saw the ugliness, the cowardice, and the sheer lack of love. It was like a veil had been ripped from her eyes. The front yard of the Miller estate was crowded. Neighbors peered over fences. A man in a suit stood on the driveway with a gavel. Going once, going twice? 500,000, a voice rang out. The crowd turned. Sarah stood at the edge of the lawn, Frank Darrow by her side. "Mama, what are you doing?" Maya whispered, standing on the porch, her face tear-streaked. "I'm buying back my equity, Maya," Sarah said without looking at her. "I'm buying the only thing in this house that was ever real." When the gavel fell, Sarah didn't celebrate. She walked up the stairs, past the stunned auctioneer, and straight to the second floor. She went to Aaliyah's room. The girl was huddled on her bed, her backpack already packed. "Come on, sugar," Sarah said, reaching out her hand. "We're going home." "To the attic?" Aaliyah asked. "No," Sarah smiled, a real radiant smile. "To the valley, to the land where the air is sweet and the only person who sets the rules is us." As they walked down the stairs, Maya was waiting at the door. She looked small. The house behind her was stripped of its dignity. "Where am I supposed to go, Mama?" Maya asked, her voice cracking. Sarah stopped. She looked at the daughter she had raised, the woman she had spent her life protecting. "You're a grown woman, Maya. You have a real estate license and a brain. You're going to do what I did. You're going to find a place to sleep. You're going to find a way to work. And you're going to figure out who you are when there's no man to hide behind and no mother to clean up your mess." "Can I come with you?" Sarah looked at Aaliyah, then back at Maya. "Not today. Today you need to feel the rain. You need to understand why I didn't cry when I left, because I knew I was walking toward myself. You need to go find Maya." Sarah handed her a small envelope. "There's enough in there for a security deposit on a small apartment. Not a palace. An apartment. The rest is up to you." Sarah walked out of the house. She didn't look back at the sold sign. She didn't look back at the Lexus being towed away. She got into Frank's car with her granddaughter and her mother's cast-iron skillet. An hour later, Marcus was being processed at the county jail. Maya was sitting on a park bench, staring at the envelope in her hand. But Sarah was back at Mount Zion. The governor's town hall was a massive success. The governor himself had pulled Sarah aside to tell her that her resurrection ribs were the best thing he'd tasted in his entire campaign. As the sun began to set, casting a golden-orange glow over the Georgia hills, Sarah sat on the porch of the parsonage. Aaliyah was in the yard, chasing a stray cat, her laughter ringing through the trees. Frank Darrow walked up the steps and handed Sarah a final set of papers. "It's done, Sarah. The land is back in your name. Marcus is looking at 5 to 10 years. And the trust for Aaliyah is locked tight." Sarah nodded, looking out at the horizon. "He thought he was taking my pension, Frank. He didn't realize he was giving me back my life." She picked up her knitting needles. The purple scarf for Aaliyah was almost finished. The stitches were even, strong and unbreakable. "You know what the best part is, Frank?" "What's that, Sarah?" "The silence," she said, closing her eyes. "For the first time in 10 years, the only voice I have to listen to is my own, and she has a lot of good things to say." As the first stars began to poke through the Georgia sky, the matriarch rocked in her chair. The storm had passed, the house of lies had fallen, and from the ruins, Sarah Miller had built something that no bank, no man, and no betrayal could ever tear down. She was home, 1 year later. The Georgia air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the savory, mouth-watering aroma of slow-smoked brisket. Sarah stood on the wide, wrap-around porch of her new home, a sturdy, beautiful farmhouse she had built on her 5-acre plot. It wasn't a mansion of glass and granite. It was a house of cedar, stone, and soul. Below the porch, a large hand-painted sign swung gently in the breeze. Sarah's Soul Sanctuary and Catering. What had started as a small favor for the church had grown into the most sought-after catering business in the tri-state area. But it was more than a business. Sarah had turned part of her land into a community garden where older women from the church came to grow heirloom vegetables, and younger women from the city came to learn the art of the slow simmer. Sarah checked her gold watch, a gift to herself for her 66th birthday. Aaliyah was due home from her new school any minute. The girl had flourished in the quiet of the valley. Her grades had soared, and she had traded her anxiety for a newfound interest in the business side of Sarah's kitchen. She wasn't just a granddaughter anymore. She was Sarah's chief tasting officer and future heir. The sound of a modest sedan pulling up the gravel driveway broke the afternoon stillness. Sarah didn't tense up. The fear that used to live in her chest had been replaced by a steady, grounded peace. Maya stepped out of the car. She looked different. The designer heels were gone, replaced by sensible flats. Her hair wasn't perfectly coiffed, but her eyes, once hollow and fearful, now looked clear. She had spent the last year working as a junior clerk in a law firm downtown, living in a small studio apartment, and attending court-mandated counseling. She had lost the house, the car, and the man, but she was slowly finding her soul. "Hi, Mama," Maya said, standing at the bottom of the porch steps. She didn't assume she was welcome to come up. She waited for the invitation. She had learned that boundaries were the highest form of respect. "Hi, Maya," Sarah replied, leaning against the railing. "You're just in time. The peach cobbler is coming out of the oven." Maya smiled, a small, genuine thing. "I brought those records you asked for. The bank finally cleared the last of the paperwork from before." Marcus was serving the second year of a 7-year sentence in a state facility. He had tried to write Sarah letters, alternating between begging for money and blaming her for his downfall. Sarah had read the first one, burned it in her mother's cast-iron skillet, and never opened another. Some fires, she realized, didn't need water. They just needed to be left to burn out on their own. They sat on the porch, the silence between them no longer heavy with lies, but light with the possibility of a new beginning. "I saw Marcus's lawyer last week," Maya said softly, looking out at the rolling hills. "He asked if I'd testify for an early parole hearing. I told him no." Sarah nodded. "That's a big step, Maya. Standing in your own truth is the hardest work you'll ever do." "I realized I was addicted to the life he promised me," Maya continued. "I let him treat you that way because I was afraid of the rain. But you were right, Mama. The rain didn't kill me. It just washed away the dirt so I could see what was underneath." Aaliyah jumped out of the school bus at the end of the lane, waving her arms wildly when she saw her mother and grandmother sitting together. She ran up the hill, dropping her backpack and hugging them both. "Mom, you're here. Did Grandma tell you about the governor's ball? We're catering the whole thing." Maya looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with pride and a lingering touch of sorrow. "I heard. Everyone is talking about the matriarch of Mount Zion." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the Georgia sky in strokes of violent purple and burnt orange, Sarah went inside to fetch the cobbler. She used the same cast-iron skillet, its surface now seasoned with another year of triumphs. She set the table, the real wood table Elijah would have loved. There were 3 places set. No one was shouting about the thermostat. No one was checking a crypto app under the table. There was only the sound of 3 generations of women laughing, the clink of silverware, and the deep, resonant quiet of a home that was truly a sanctuary. Sarah looked at her daughter and granddaughter. She had protected her pension, yes. She had saved her land, yes. But her greatest achievement wasn't the money or the business. It was the lesson she had carved into the hearts of the women sitting across from her. You are not a liability. You are not an asset to be traded. You are the fire, and you are the hearth. As the stars began to blanket the valley, Sarah Miller sat back in her chair and exhaled. The harvest was in. The barns were full. And for the first time in her long, beautiful life, the matriarch was at rest.